Well, I know something really important is up today. I hope I don't have any outstanding warrants because the heavy hitters are here from the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department. First of all, when Captain Tim Miller comes along, I know that he's got something big he's got to talk about. But when he also brings along the big boss, there's something important we've got to touch on. And so Sheriff Tom Carter is in the studio with us as well. First of all, welcome to both of you. Glad to have you back.
Oh, thank you very much.
I think the last time we had the two of you in studio was about 6 or 8 months ago. It's been a while.
Yeah,
we burned our bridges then, didn't we?
Tim was just headed out of the office and grabbed me, and he said, "You got to go say something important down for the radio program." So,
what do you have today?
One thing I want to talk about, I think everybody's interested in, is this deal in Oregon.
And your counterpart over there is kind of caught between a rock and a hard place.
My counterpart, I'm just pretty tickled that it's in Oregon and not in southern Idaho, the way I look at that. But, you got people trying to second guess him, on things he's doing. People saying, well, if I was a sheriff there, this would happen or that would happen. And I got to tell you, that guy's, as far as I can tell, that guy's doing a bang-up job on it.
In other words, he's learned that, or he's done a good job keeping everything calm.
Yes.
I guess is the best way to look at that.
Anytime you can resolve something peacefully, that's obviously the way you want to go. And I think he's kind of taking the stand. It's a federal issue, and as long as his constituents don't get hurt, then he'll pretty much just let it ride out.
And I was going to say, he seems to have convinced the federal government to take the same approach as well.
I think the feds have probably learned a lot, in previous issues. That same group a year ago, wasn't it? They was down in Mesquite, in Nevada. Yeah. That is same group of people pointing guns at federal officers, and that's never a good thing.
It seems they also learned a lesson too, though, because they're not pointing any guns at agents any longer either.
Who does that? That's just crazy. So.
Yeah, there's other ways to resolve that. It's that's why we have the court system, and we don't say we have a perfect system, but it's certainly not to take over properties and say it's theirs. But I may not agree with the way that they're taking over this property, and then they're going to give it back. And that's why I was telling the sheriff on the way here. I'm sure the federal agents are just sitting there documenting what they're doing, and then there'll be indictments later.
Yeah. I was privy to a letter that sheriff had sent to the Western States Association, and he says anybody that's got an opinion, most of them don't know what they're talking about. The Hammonds, the people this is all about, they've clearly said, hey, they're not representing us, and that letter the sheriff had laid out certain things. It's a pretty simple deal in the great scheme of things, so.
There was a story I read about all of this the other day that said that though this is going to become a much bigger issue geographically, it's a Western issue now. It's not just an Oregon issue, and I don't know that we'll see anything like this standoff here, but that the pressures on the government are going to increase from maybe the ranching community and the public, and that's where that does eventually impact your role. It will at some point.
I get to go to seminars, conferences for different organizations I belong to, and I'm constantly hearing horror stories from sheriffs across the western United States, and central United States, and there are horror stories about dealing with federal agents, and I get to thinking that I must be doing something wrong, because I get along really well with all the federal agents around here, the Forest Service, the BLM, I've swore in some federal agents, just so it would give them a little more authority, and we have a remarkable relationship, so.
In other words, maybe the communication that goes back and forth is a little better.
That very well could be it. I have a memorandum of understanding, so the deputies, they work the Forest Service and they work the BLM land, and that's not for free. The government, we keep track of the hours and submit a bill and they pay us, but it works out really good. We've never had an issue.
And it's worked that way for years. It's working, at all levels, it seemed to work that way.
We got a caller with us, and we're going to try to get the caller on before the break. Got about a minute before the break comes up. But caller, you're on the air with both Tom Carter and Tim Miller.
Yes, good morning. I think we need to give credit to the 3% group. That group is called the 3%ers. And they're basically peace negotiators between the groups that are down there. The sheriff hasn't done really anything to bring those groups together or to have any kind of communications. And that's been a real problem. There hadn't been any communications between those groups, the FBI, the ranchers, or the Bundy group. And so that's been causing a lot of rumors and a lot of problems. And so those folks went in and they took their camera crew and they met with the FBI agents.
We got about 15 seconds before the break, so we'll have these two sit around. You can stay for a few more minutes. We'll talk after the break about this. I do know that the sheriff met with Bundy before the 3% actually arrived, a day before or so.
That is correct. That's my understanding.
Yeah, I from in the timeline of things. So, and they shook hands, as I understand too, and before the sheriff departed. Got more coming up. Sheriff Tom Carter and Captain Tim Miller from the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department joining us in the studio this morning, and it's 30. It's 8:40. We've got plenty more coming up. A couple of studio guests, and they're taking some of your telephone calls as well, but we're reflecting a bit on what's going on in neighboring Oregon, where mainstream media, at least for now, seems to have forgotten the story while it goes and chases a few more house fires. But you still have a group of men and probably some women, too, as well, who are involved with that. They have been occupying some buildings at the Malheur Wildlife Refuge. Joining us in studio, Sheriff Tom Carter and Captain Tim Miller from the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department. And they'll be here until 9 o'clock this morning, taking some of your telephone calls as well at 736-0300. It's 8:44. It's 29. And Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Caller mentioned the 3% Idaho. I've met some of those fellows. Some of them have been on the air as guests. They seem nice enough. But I guess the question is, was their role really necessary? She thought they did a good job, obviously, getting involved. What's your take on all of this?
Well, if they did in fact do some good down there, then if it's resolved peacefully, and if the sheriff, 3%ers, or whoever, the neighbor, if they can get it resolved peacefully, then you're right, they done a good job. Now whatever their role is or their opinion, I don't know what that would be.
Yeah,
one of the things I think as the caller needs to understand, and as we look at it, is we're not intimately involved with that situation. We're not the boots on the ground. They're working. And so we don't know what's happened every hour, every day. We don't know when they call each other and when they talk so we can't comment of if the sheriff has visited with these people more than once or twice. We don't know.
My guess is Bundy's been on the phone with them quite a bit.
I would think.
I would think so too. And what you got to understand is the sheriff's constituents, the people in that county love him. They're all about that sheriff. So they're watching what's happening and they like it. So that tells me a lot that he must be doing something right.
We have a caller or two that would like to reach us during the course of the program. It's 8:45, 31 right now, and you're next. You're on the air on KLIX.
Yeah, I got hung up on.
What was that? That's called a hard break. We have to do that.
Yeah. It was an injustice to the rancher is the reason that this group went down there. And the ranchers had no recourse. They had no agency that they could go to get help, because every agency that they would need to go to resolve these problems was a federal agency. And so that's the reason that Bundy stepped in to bring attention to this, and it had to get nationwide attention. And but the problem is there is no communication, and the feds are the ones that are blowing this thing all out of proportion, putting barricades. They're putting barricades around all of the government buildings.
I think we heard you, and I think if you'd like a guest appearance, I can arrange that later on. But I want to get back to the two studio guests on this matter, and I will agree with one point she's making here. We wouldn't be talking about the Hammonds or the injustice committed, many people believe, against them, if it hadn't been for Bundy and his group, that they're bringing attention to it, at least if nothing else.
You're exactly right. Them guys would have been resentenced and climbed in a car and been on their way to jail, and you and I wouldn't be talking about it had it not been for this Bundy group. So you got to assume, that's not a bad thing, to get issues like that out in the open.
Sure. The debate has been, what's the best way to do that?
Right.
Yeah.
And it's all federal issues, that's federal property, a federal crime. It was federal court, a federal jury, so it is all federal stuff, and this sheriff's kind of caught in the middle of it.
He said he would escort them out of the county, but once they leave the county, basically the federal government's likely going to pick them up at some point. Right? I mean, that I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. That's probably goes without saying.
I mean, so he can protect them as long as they get to the county line.
Well, to a point, as long as they're not breaking any laws.
Right. Right.
So.
We have another caller with us. You're up next. You're on the air. It's 848-32, and you're on KLIX with Sheriff Tom Carter and Captain Tim Miller.
Good morning, Mr. Carter and Mr. Miller. I have a question for you. At the end of the day, whether you sympathize with these individuals or not, or you refer to their tactics as kind of over the line, aren't they committing a crime? Isn't this a crime no matter what they're protesting? But it's okay to protest, but the way they went about it, isn't that breaking the law no matter if you sympathize with them or not? Tell me if that's true or not. Thank you.
That is correct. They are in violation of federal statutes, any way you cut it. If it's trespassing, yes, you're exactly right.
And so that's the part that likely where they'll end up in federal court.
Yeah. But what you've seen now is the federal people are not doing much about this. They're not fixing to get involved.
Nobody wants another Ruby Ridge.
Another Ruby Ridge.
We have another caller with us. You're up next, and you're on the air. It's coming up on 8:49, and you're on News Radio 1310 KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com. Go ahead.
Well, I hope I'm not covering old ground here, but when we feel threatened by the federal government makes us fearful, then that's a form of terrorism. And when we have the sovereignty of the county and the sheriff is the head of that sovereign county, we would like to think that you would pick us over the federal government, despite the fact that you get funding sometimes from them or not. Okay, that point being made. Because of the Bundys going there, and the local ranchers in Harney County said this. One of the ranchers, they started a new organization in that county, and they said, this kind of woke us up. It's amazing how we can deny the facts or act like it'll never happen to us, but when it gets so close, then we decide we care about our fellow man, and I'll hang up.
You are there again. You're exactly right. What myself and all sheriffs across the country have in common is we've all taken an oath that we got to uphold the United States Constitution and the state laws. Well, I for one am huge on the Constitution, and I'm not going to do anything to violate it.
And we want to point out too. You stated right at the top of the program, you're glad you're not in your counterpart's shoes in Oregon because he can't win for trying.
He cannot. And what's funny is 3 weeks ago, he was probably sitting at a coffee shop somewhere visiting with his buds, without a care in the world. And then
Some of the ranchers,
yeah. And then all of a sudden,
things
got awful.
We have another caller with us. You're up next. You're on the air. Our guest in studio, Sheriff Tom Carter and Captain Tim Miller from the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department. You're on the air with Bill Colley as well at Top Story, and you can go ahead.
If you consider all the unlawful surveillance of the American people and everything that was going on in southern Nevada there with the Bundys, the feds have been watching the Bundys ever since. They know what they've been doing. When these Bundys had stated months ago that they were going to do something big, the feds knew exactly what they were going to do. They could have just placed a couple of agents in that building and stop that whole thing from starting. They wanted it just to happen, and they're going to make sure that they don't get out of there without any problems.
I'm sure that every time even you use a Shoppers Club card, the federal government can track down what you're doing.
Again,
right?
we're not going to second guess whatever tactics or whatever investigations the federal government does. It's just like for ours, we're not going to second guess what Twin Falls Police does, and I'm sure that they wouldn't, because we don't know. We don't know what their plans were, and again, it's
somebody else's investigation at this point. We have another caller with us. You're up next. You're on the air on KLIX. Good morning.
Hello, Mr. Colley and Mr. Sheriff. I got a question too. Is it not true that people who are in this country illegally are breaking the law? And we know all about these people. They're all over the place. And why are these people not going to jail and suffering the consequences of breaking the law, and even if we are sympathetic with them. Can you answer me that, please?
Immigration is an issue not only across the country, but here too. Our deputies and our city policemen deal with people who are illegally in the country, and mostly what we do, if number one, if we're dealing with them, they have broke a local or a state code or crime. That's why we would be dealing with them if it's a driving while intoxicated or whatever. Once we determine that they are in country illegal, our only recourse is to notify the Homeland Security or the Border Patrol, and then it kind of is up to them on what they're going to do about it. And sometimes they're interested and sometimes they're not. But
they'll have certain criteria that has to be met, but again, it's at that point, then it's up to them.
I was sharing, in fact, I want to thank the caller for chiming in. I was sharing with the two guests during the commercial break a story from a police chief I know in Delaware by the name of Bill Topping, who once said that if he locked up everybody illegally in his town, because he had a lot of people working in chicken plants and canneries, if he locked them all up, he said his jail would be overrun soon because nobody comes to pick them up. And he said that's the problem. The local law enforcement isn't necessarily always getting the support. Your jail would be overrun with people before long.
Oh, absolutely. We deal with that all the time. So being in the country illegally, is like I say, we notify the federal government that we have them and that they are here illegally. They either choose to come get them or not to come get them. We deal with the crime that we have them for on the state or county or city codes.
Got a couple of things. One question just before we wrap up, because we've got about 3 minutes. This it was gut wrenching, and I'm sure it was worse for your people as well because they were right out there on that cold night. But anything new on this case about baby Angel Rose at this point?
Our detectives are working leads on that every day. As you can imagine, it is a priority. This child is terrible as that is, and in fact, I want everybody to understand that tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock, we're going to give this child a proper, or Saturday, excuse me. This child, nobody can control how it came into this world, but the sheriff's office is certainly going to control how it goes out, and we hope that anybody that wants to come and say their farewells to this baby, they're certainly welcome.
Where's the church located? Which church?
Parks, I believe.
Parks on Kimberly Road.
Yeah, it's out on Kimberly Road East.
Oh, okay, so is it the funeral home?
Mm-hmm. The funeral home. And I got to tell you, Parks stepped up to the plate. Twin Falls Cemetery stepped up to the plate, and it would amaze you how many people have contacted me and donated money, that want to help. And that's pretty good stuff,
And we only can hope that, that somehow we get some resolution to this and that it doesn't happen again.
And one of the things, like I said, they're doing like a baby shower type of situation where people could donate some products where they would go to a crisis center for mothers. And so we're hoping some good comes from this through that. So
we're kind of taking the attitude that the mother has got to be hurting, as the way it affected the citizens of this county and our deputies. Holy cow, it broke his heart. The mother's got to be hurting.
And people, and I've said this before because we get those calls on air sometimes from people who they do not like law enforcement. But when a deputy comes across something like that deputy's a human being. And I think sometimes people forget these things happen much more often in your deputy's lives than they do in anybody else's lives.
Well, I'll tell you, to me, it was good police work because he saw the bag and he went to another call. And then he comes back because he saw the bag along the road and just investigated a little further. He could have not come back at all.
Because a lot of times you just see a bag on the road and it's nothing.
Yeah, that's true, and it's easy to, they're all the time getting calls on hurt children, dead children. But you have the opportunity to process that on the way to the call. The deputy this time,
he found it.
He found it. He picked up what he thought was a person. He looked in it to see if there was any identification, and it would be horrible to what he found.
Yeah, that initial reaction would almost knock you over, I would imagine.
It would. I've been in this business a long time, and I can't think of anybody I've ever known or worked with, that wouldn't have been affected the same way.
I remember talking to a police officer back in the 90s on the night he was retiring after 30 years on the job. And he got talking about a case with a dead child 28 years later, and he broke into tears still talking about it 28 years later. And it just tells you that it just takes such a big chunk out of you.
Yeah, we've been there. You know, we feel their pain.
I want to thank the two of you for coming by today. You certainly threw some kerosene on the fire.
Hey, I appreciate you having us.
Give us a call anytime. We'll beat up on you.
Yeah, all right. Want to thank Tom Carter and Tim Miller for joining us this morning, the sheriff and the captain from the Sheriff's Department here in Twin Falls County. It's 8:58. We've got more coming up, 31. Also, Governor Butch Otter is scheduled to join us at 9:40 this morning right here on KLIX.